Can you tell me a little bit about the Mont Blanc area and what makes it so special and why are people drawn to it?
People are pleasantly surprised by how beautiful it is, because every single day you just go, oh my gosh, how can it be any more beautiful? And then it is. If you haven't seen glaciers before, and if you haven't seen snow-covered mountains in the summer, that is just, I think even people who know what to expect are blown away.
Emma, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you? What is your background and experience when it comes to hiking and Mont Blanc? Yeah.
Well, I'll try and do a quick resume. So I moved to the Alps in '99 just to do a ski season, actually. And then I just never really went home. And I kept talking about getting a proper job, and that went on and on for a couple of years. And then I was doing winter seasons working for a company that only operated in the winter. So I needed something to do in the summer. So it seemed befitting to train as a hiking guide. So I've been doing it a long time now and fluctuating around the Alps. I spent a lot of time in Switzerland. In fact, I had a broken ankle for a time. So I was a tour guide doing train tours around Switzerland, going and ending up in Zermatt, and then I ended up settling in Chamonix because it is such an amazing place to live. And there we go, Tour du Mont Blanc on my doorstep. So I keep walking around that as well.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Mont Blanc area and maybe Tour du Mont Blanc, the story that you just shared of kind of traveling around the area and then settling in Chamonix is a pretty common one. What makes it so special and why are people drawn to it?
There's so many good things about Chamonix. It's a really good place to live year round. Quite a lot of ski resorts go very quiet, almost like ghost towns in the summer. So it's a great place with a great community. For example, I'm in a choir, so I can do things that are still part of normal life as well as being really active. And the other thing is, yes, it can be quite busy here because it is so popular and so beautiful. But at the same time, if you've got like a crazy idea, I love the 57 hours name because that's exactly what I used to do, try and cram everything I could into 57 hours. And you'll always find at least a couple of other people who go, yeah, I'm up for that. I'm up for hiking all night long so that I can do the TMB. Basically, I did it the very first time I did it. I only had a very short amount of time off work. So I went with my friend and we just kind of walked all night and did it in about 57 hours, I think. Oh, no, less actually, 36 or something like that. But that was the first time I did it. There's just always people who are up for doing stuff here of all ages and all abilities.
Yeah, nice. Maybe, yeah, on Chamonix or just with the Mont Blanc area, would you say that it's the easy access to all of this outdoors is kind of what makes it attractive?
I guess I don't think about easy access particularly because I'm quite happy to walk. But yeah, there's absolutely loads of cable cars that do get you up into the mountains quite quickly. And also the good thing about Chamonix is there's often lifts open in the spring and in the autumn when a lot of places are closed. And you can get up quite high, like the Aiguille du Midi cable car, 3,842 meters. The view is incredible. Even if you're not going up to go mountaineering and you just kind of want to go up and acclimatize a little bit, it's quite handy, has to be said.
Yeah, I've been up there a few times and hiked, and I can second that the views are quite incredible from up there. You see the Mont Blanc, which is the highest peak in Europe, so pretty fascinating. Okay, well, to keep us moving, how many guided hikes do you operate in the area? Maybe that's a better question versus how many hikes there are.
I think endless numbers of guided hikes we operate, but the ones that we offer as group tours that people can book on that kind of that people have heard of, I'd say there's 8 main ones. So the Tour du Mont Blanc, the Haute Route, which is Chamonix to Zermatt, the Tour of the Monterey, the Tour of the Matterhorn, Tour de Combain, the Swiss Via Alpina, and then various things in the Bernese Oberland and also the Grand Paradiso. So those are like the main ones that people might have heard of. And then we do countless little gem kind of hikes that probably hardly anyone's heard of, and they're right directly opposite Mont Blanc, but all the rest of the world's on the Tour de Mont Blanc, and will be opposite on the Tour de Fils or something, which is just like a 3-day hike with amazing views, but not that many people have heard of it.
That was actually going to be my next question. You've kind of run us through the classics, so Tour du Mont Blanc, Haute Route, and then could you give me maybe a few of the hidden gem hikes that you mentioned?
I mean, I could probably bore you senseless talking about them all, but so the Fizz is the one I mentioned, and that's on my doorstep. I can step out of my door and I'm on the Tour de Fizz. So I like that one. It's spectacular scenery. And hardly anyone's heard of the Fizz range, but if you do the Tour du Mont Blanc, you'll see it because you're looking at it. I also adore the Tour du Mont Blanc, which is in Switzerland. It's a 4-day hike, or you can actually do it in anything from 3, 4 or 5 days. But again, hardly anyone's heard of it. So it's just so quiet, but the scenery is just amazing on all of these hikes, actually. So yeah, my favourites, I think, are the Mouveron and the Fizz, and then maybe the GR5, which actually is a really lot. Like if you did the whole thing, it's 3 months. But where I live, there's short sections of it. So you can go from Chamonix to Lake Geneva, for example, and cross through the Chablais. And again, like you'll see Mont Blanc most days on that hike. And then if you do it in the other direction, you can go further south all the way down to Nice.
Okay, next. On that similar theme, maybe, what do you think are the must-do hikes for first-time visitors? Often people go to do the TMB. Like, is that a great hike for a first-time visitor, or do you have some other recommendations?
I do think the Tour du Mont Blanc is a good trek. For example, if you're doing a self-guided trip and you haven't done a self-guided trip before, the Tour du Mont Blanc is a pretty good one to do as your first one because there are quite a lot of other people on it. So it's quite hard to go wrong because there's always someone to ask. It is quite busy. So that's the only downside. It is popularity has made it, there's a lot of other people around. But that makes it a good thing if you're doing a self-guided trip. And it also means if you're doing it on your own, there's quite a lot of camaraderie with other people that you might see bump into on a lot of the days. So I do think it's quite a good one. I don't think it's necessarily the best trip to do if you've never done any multi-day hiking ever and you suddenly came to do the Tour du Mont Blanc. If you're going to do the whole thing in 10 days, that could be quite hard. It depends what people are used to. If they're fit, then it's going to be okay. But if you've just come from doing nothing, then I think that probably would be quite hard. So I'd probably just go and try and look for a hike with less height gain, because I think people do get quite surprised by how much height gain there is on the Tour du Mont Blanc. There's about 1,000 meters a day on average, which is quite a lot and hard to recreate for a lot of people. So therefore, I think if I was just doing my first ever hike, I might consider doing, rather than a point-to-point trip, I'd probably think about doing a centre-based trip. So you could come to Chamonix for like a 3-day or 6-day trip, and then you could do day hikes using the cable cars to take out a lot of the strain of going up. And you can make it as easy as you want if you do that. And then there's something for everybody if you do that sort of thing. And also I'd consider going to the Bernese Oberland, where there's just countless cable cars, mountain railways. You could even go and do that quite easily in a wheelchair. There's so much accessible hiking. So I think those are probably slightly better to do if it's first timers, just to see whether you even like hiking. Because if it's the first time, you might not like it. Most people do, but you never know.
Okay, nice. Then can you maybe give us a few hikes in order of their difficulty? Maybe 1 or 2 for beginners, 1 or 2 for intermediates, and then 1 or 2 for advanced. Some of these that, we've mentioned and we'll just be talking about today.
There's loads of different ways of grading hikes. Personally, I just always grade them out of 10 because I just find it easier. I like it. So I'm going to start with 10. So I do a couple of trips that I grade 10. Actually, they're not here on my doorstep, but they're not that, like, one of them I grade is the GR20, which is in Corsica, not a million miles away from here. I grade that a 10 because it's hard and rugged and scrambling and lots of chains and long days. Absolutely wouldn't be doing that as my first time hike. And then I also give the Altavia 2 in the Dolomites a grade 10. And then the ones here that are local to me that I don't think I grade any of them a 10, but I do go with a 9 for the Tour of the Monte Rosa, which starts and finishes in Switzerland. Well, you can start anyway. It goes through Zermatt. It also goes through Saste, and it also goes into Italy for a couple of days. That trip I graded 9 because there's quite long days and quite rugged terrain, and there's not easy to have luggage delivery on that trip, so you're going to be carrying your own stuff. I do a version of the Tour du Mont Blanc, which I call the ultimate Tour du Mont Blanc. I definitely give that a 9, and that's we do every single variant under the sun. We go off to the Robert Blanc hut to kind of get really away from the crowds. We go up to the Orny hut, so that's a extreme version of the TMB. So I definitely give that a 9. I could maybe even creep that up to a 10, actually. 9.5, let's give that. And then moving down, like I think actually a lot of the trips around here I give, and like I give the TMB, if you do all the variants, I'd give it an 8. If you just do the standard route, or if you do a highlights version, it could be 6 or 7, maybe 7. There's no escaping the 1,000-meter climbs and descents though. And then I kind of grade my hikes out of 10, and then I kind of get stuck around 6 because I don't really offer anything much easier than a 6 for the multi-day ones. I certainly do for day hikes. But let me think, what's our easiest one? Probably Bernese Oberland, but on the basis that it's a centre-based trip, because we stay in the same hotel for a week in Grindelwald. And then it means if people are a bit tired, they can have a rest day, and there's plenty to do. And, you know, it's the access to the cable cars that make me give that one a bit of a lower grade, a 7.
I guess maybe on the easier one-day hikes, we have someone who's asking for recommendation of scenic one-day hikes around Chamonix for families.
For families, so I think I'd probably do the Lac Blanc, because there's so many different ways you can do the Lac Blanc hike, but you can get the Flèche cable car to do most of the hike gain, and then you can do a circular route, so up one way and down the other, that just takes a couple of hours up, hour and a half down, and then you can have lunch at the hut. And I mean, it's not too hard. If you do the circular one, you do have one ladder, and if you just do there and back from the cable car direct to the hut, then you can avoid ladders. But even those ladders, like I do take kids on, much more supervised. If they're young kids, I put them on a rope just for that bit. But yeah, it is suitable for families. There's these hikes either side of the valley that go parallel to the valley floor, and they're called the Grand Balcon. So you can do the Grand Balcon Sud and the Grand Balcon Nord. I'm hesitant to say, like, they're easy in terms of effort, like they're undulating. The nearest you're going to get to flat, like round here, they're undulating. But on both of those hikes, there are a couple of places where you probably don't want to fall over. So if you have got young kids, you definitely want to keep an eye on them for those short sections. You can't just let them run off, because there are definitely places where you just couldn't fall over. But in general, they're quite, they take 2.5 hours or so each side of the valley. And then if you want super easy, you can just stick to the valley floor, where there's really wide paths and the Petit Balcon, and just between Chamonix and Le Prat and up to Argentière, there's super easy paths.
Well, I want to go back to the TMB. Can you tell me a little bit about how difficult it is, for example, maybe like daily mileage, elevation, fitness level? Like what are we looking at here?
If I talk about the guided group itineraries that we've got, like the 10-day one and the 7-day one, our trip days tend to be 15 to 20 kilometers. Then the hike gain tends to be around about 1,000 to sometimes 1,200 meters, and the descent's the same. There are a couple of days where it's much longer, just because of the terrain. On the final day, when you're descending from the top of the Brevant down to Les Ouches, it's a 1,700 meter descent. So, but the beauty of that one is that if you're saving it till the end of your trip and doing it on the last day, which is what we do, if you don't want to hurt your knees on the down, or with that long descent, you could just get the cable car down. So there's quite a good, I quite like those options. And then if we do our ultimate Tour du Mont Blanc, there's one day where we have a 2,000 meter ascent, and that is a lot. Most people would find that quite tiring.
And you mentioned a little bit about variations for the TMB. What does that mean, and what variations do you recommend, maybe?
Well, obviously I recommend all of them. But what it means is you get off the beaten track a little bit, and they're usually further, and they're usually higher, but not always. And they're usually a bit more rugged. And that is what motivates me. When I set up these trips and set up these itineraries, what really motivated me was just getting the most out of the Tour du Mont Blanc, doing the best version of it that I possibly could. And so there's no doubt about it that the variants are less crowded. I say that now, and maybe now I'm telling everyone in the whole world about them, maybe that will change, but they are less crowded than the main trail. And because they go higher, like some of the views are just incredible. So I think my favourite variant is by far the Entre Deux Sauts, which is between Courmayeur and the Bonatti Hut, or Arnouvre if you're staying there. And it adds on a good few hours to the day. But doing the Mont de la Saxe Ridge, for me, those are the best views you'll see of Mont Blanc on the whole of the TMB. So it's worth noting here that almost every company that offers a highlights trip doesn't do that day. And so for me, that's a highlights trip without the actual highlight. So all of our highlights trips have that day in. I just love it. So yeah, that's my favourite variant. There are quite a few others. The Col des Forts, for example. I don't often do that one. I do really like it, but I often don't do it just because it does hold snow until quite late in the season. So you have to be super careful. I wouldn't touch it at all in June. And I probably don't even start doing it until mid-July. It depends on how long the snow lasts each year, but it's definitely can be dangerous. And again, another variant that people often do is the Fenêtre d'Arpette, which is between Champay and Col de la Fauclaise. Beautiful, spectacular day, but actually the day that it's replacing is also spectacular. So the views that you do on the standard route that day are just phenomenal. I don't do the Fenêtre d'Arpette as often just because I love the alternative bovine. And also, again, with the Fenêtre d'Arpette, like it holds snow to a bit later. You know, these are the places where people have accidents. You know, you do get rockfall. There's a lot of people that take that quite lightly. And so I do think very, very carefully about my decision about whether I'm going to do the Fenêtre d'Arpette or not. And I would say on the TMB, I do it less often because if I'm doing anti-clockwise, I don't like walking up, spending a lot of time underneath the rockfall area. Whereas if I'm doing the Haute Route, because it repeats that terrain, I'll almost always do the Fenêtre d'Arpette because you're on your way downhill, so you're exposed to the rockfall bit for a bit less time. But it is worth thinking about those sorts of things before embarking on the variants.
Yeah. On the clockwise / counterclockwise, what's the difference?
Oh, I mean, I get asked this question a lot. Most companies do anti-clockwise, and then you'll get a few people that desperately want to do it clockwise because they've read that that's going to be better because they're only going to cross people at lunchtime. But I've concluded, my big conclusion, and this is why I mostly do anti-clockwise, is because, so if you're doing it clockwise, if you're starting in Les Houches, your day one is going to be walking up from Les Houches to the top of the Brevant when you're totally unacclimatized and you're going up that massive ascent. I just can't think of a worse way to start your holiday than to climb the biggest climb. I'd prefer to have the option for those who really feel they want to complete the circle. I like having that on my last day because by that time, you know, your knees are used to it, you're acclimatized, and then there's that cable car option for anyone who wants to take the cable car down. So that's my main reason for doing it. And the clockwise is that I finish with the descent down to Les Houches, and there are so many options where people can bail on the way down, where it also doesn't feel like you're bailing because, you know, you just get the cable car down to Chamonix town and then you're back at your hotel. So it doesn't feel like you're cheating. But yeah, I think that's my main reason. You know, if that's the only reason. So sometimes accommodation's quite fully booked. So sometimes it can be quite easy to look at it the other way around because then your accommodation jigsaw might work better. So we certainly do it. The views they're amazing whichever way around you do it.
Well, we're still sticking to the trail, but I want to get into accommodations on the Tour du Mont Blanc, but maybe also Haute Route, just generally in the area. What options can people choose from when they're planning their hikes? And maybe if you can tell us a little bit with the huts, how does that work?
That's quite a good question, a really good question, because there's so many different ways of doing each of these hikes. So if I talk about the TMB and the Haute Route, the big things to decide are how much you want to spend, because you can have 5-star hotels on a lot of the Tour du Mont Blanc. So, you know, you can do an amazing trip in really quite luxury, and you can do the same on the Haute Route, not for all of it, but there are certainly quite a lot of places where you can get some really, really nice hotels. And then, or if you do the other end of the spectrum, you can stay in a mountain hut in a dormitory every single night and then have a much better value trip. So I think, yeah, you've got to think about what sort of standard of accommodation you want. On the Haute Route, for example, if you're doing the whole thing, you are going to have some unavoidable hut nights just because of where the terrain is and where they're located. It would be too far to try and do hotel to hotel. So I think a lot of deluxe Haute Route options miss out some quite spectacular scenery because they don't want to stay in mountain huts in dorms. And so I think it's worth thinking for the Haute Route, are you prepared to have a couple of dorm nights? Because I do think it's worth it to experience all of the scenery and do the whole thing. What else would you consider? Whether or not you're going to have luggage delivery. On both of those treks, you can have luggage delivery pretty much daily. But as a general rule, you can't get the luggage to the mountain huts that are up high in the mountains. For example, we do a 10-day Haute Route and you can get luggage for every single night apart from 2 of them. And on our TMB, on our 10-day one, you get the luggage every single night apart from if you stay at the Bonatti hut or the Combal or Elisabetta. You also probably think about how much time you have available, because you can do 3-day versions, 4-day versions, 5-day versions. You can do highlights versions where you miss out certain sections, or you can try and cram it all in a kind of trail running version, like we do a 6-day Tour du Mont Blanc, where you pretty much do every step. You do every step of the way on our 6-day one, but you're kind of shuffling.
Yeah. Can you camp along the trail?
I mean, camping's slightly more complicated because there are various rules. So with, for example, the Tour du Mont Blanc, each country is slightly different as to where you're allowed to camp, and a lot of places it's not allowed. You can camp on the TMB, for example, and there's so many campsites. So actually you could easily camp the whole thing and have campsites with facilities the whole way around. I think I'm probably not best placed to answer about the wild camping aspect, because what I might do myself is probably not what I would say to other people on the internet. Because, and actually on the TMB there are designated what they call bivouac or camping areas that you are allowed to camp in. And so officially, that's where you should be staying, in these official places. But there's certainly, I can think of so many times when I've done little variants and you think, God, it'd be amazing to just camp here. No one would know, but you shouldn't really be doing that.
Yeah. We can move away from the camping back to the huts. How difficult is it to book the huts?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be honest. So since COVID, the whole world just wants to do that TMB. The demand has gone off the scale. I know what it is. Like, I honestly, all of my friends who are guides, all of my friends who run travel companies, we all just kind of expected like 2022 and 2023, fair enough, that's going to be busy because it's 2 years worth of people, it's still the COVID rollover people. But now 2024, all of my friends who run these mountain huts and who run the hotels, every single one of them is saying they've never seen this level of demand. So what I would have answered that question a couple of years ago, when I would have said, it's not too complicated, but I think it's getting harder and harder. And I say that as someone who, I know exactly what I'm doing when I'm booking each accommodation, but it's harder and harder to book it each year for sure. And the problem is some places have opened their bookings now for 2025. Other places are not going to open their bookings until maybe October, November. And one or two, maybe more than that actually, are only just opening them now for this coming summer. But for my trips, I can't wait until March to be finding out, because I don't want to have 9 places booked and waiting on one who's opening in March. Not if they turn around and say they can't do it, then you've kind of scuppered your itinerary. So as a result, that is super hard and it's a massive jigsaw. I don't think it's easy to book. I think that the Tour du Mont Blanc in particular is quite hard. The Haute Route is a bit easier just because it's less busy. Those places where the bottleneck areas where the TMB and the Haute Route share a couple of days, for example, Triangle is just always fully booked, as is Les Chapiers on the Tour du Mont Blanc, always, just fully booked.
So on that topic, how you're kind of mentioning that you secure the huts and everything year and couple of months in advance. So how far in advance would you recommend for people to book their spots?
If you'd asked me this question a couple of years ago, I'd have probably just said, book by October or November, maybe even December for the following summer. And actually, a couple of years ago, I can remember I was taking bookings in March and not really getting any problems. And then nowadays, for example, I'm booking some self-guided people in, just 2 or 3 people at a time. And one place is already fully booked for the night I need in 2025. And I'm like, oh my God, it's incroyable, unbelievable. Book now would be my advice if you're thinking of coming in 2025.
far as possible. Okay. For food, I'm going to shift a little bit again. Do you carry your own food on the trail or can you eat at the huts?
Good thing about the TMB in particular is there are so many places to eat. So you hardly have to carry anything. You know, like every hut, this is the beauty of these mountain huts around here. They all serve an evening meal. On the Tour du Mont Blanc, they can do all the dietary requirements. You know, they're used to it. So you can be vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, lactose-free. They're pretty good. For the evening meals, that is. And then for the breakfast, maybe not quite so good, but they still serve a breakfast every day. And then lunches, you can either order picnics from the huts. You pass through enough towns that you can go to shops quite regularly to get your lunches. Also, there's plenty of the mountain huts. And this is quite a highlight for me. I love going and having a nice lunch in a hut. There are a couple of huts that are particularly good. So I enjoy going to lunch. Elisabetta's one of them. Really good. It's nice. First thing I do as soon as I get into Italy, go and have a nice lasagna at the Elisabetta.
Yeah. Okay, nice. And can you tell me a little bit more about what the food is like? I mean, France has amazing food, but what can you expect at each hut?
I think that's another good thing about the TMB, actually, that there's quite a lot of variety because it goes through 3 different countries. Certainly for this region, to be fair, it is mountain fare, like the famous foods of cheeses and, meats like ham and pork. That's the sort of, ham and cheese. That's basically what you get here. They just tend to serve like hearty mountain food in plentiful, portions.
Okay, perfect. Can we talk a little bit about the weather? I know that most of these hikes are running from May to September. What is the weather throughout the season?
It's actually quite a short season. I would say you wouldn't do the TMB in May. People really would start like end of June. My trips start end of June, going through to end of September. Some people will do early June. Like I'll do early June for private trips, but it's going to be very, very snowy. So basically, June will have residual snow left over from the winter. And that can cause, it's fine most of the time, but there's a couple of places where, if you slipped and fell, and slipped in the snow, it would be not very good. So for that reason, I tend to try and start later in June than earlier. Then you've got July and August, quite busy, often quite hot. And then September, starting to get more autumnal weather. But any time in the year, in any time in the summer even, some years we have a heat wave in June. Other years we have rain, and other years, like, for example, last summer, I spent a lot of time rearranging people's hikes in August on the Haute Route because it snowed, I think it was about 30 or 40 centimetres of snow, which was just incredible. I mean, that's quite unusual, but it does happen. So normally, I don't even think you can say what's normal anymore. I might have said that would be more likely to happen in September when it ought to be getting a bit cooler. But that happened in August, and it was just about okay on the TMB because the passes are lower. Like, people did get snow, but on the Haute Route, I mean, there was an avalanche risk suddenly. You don't expect that in the summer. That's quite unusual. So you basically, I think you have to expect anything. You can expect hot sun, normal sun. Like the maximum temperatures, I think, when there's a heat wave tends to be 36, maybe 38 degrees Celsius. But I'd say normal could be 25 to 30 degrees. Occasionally you just get a few days where it's raining and it can be quite cold. So you can just expect anything, really. It could be like that any month. Oh, and I also should have said the Haute Route season is even shorter because the cols are higher. So you'll get snow even into early mid-July. You still get snow. So we don't start our Haute Routes till like 10. It's around about the 10th, 15th of July for that reason. And then we probably finish a little bit earlier. So it's only really a 2.5-month season for the Haute Route.
Well, I know that you said that it's pretty unpredictable, but if you had to give the best month or months for the TMB and for the Haute Route, which one would it be for each?
So TMB, end of June into July for flowers, just adorable, beautiful carpets of flowers. However, July is the most crowded. August I quite like because it can be a little bit quieter, but by then the flowers are often done. You will have a few later blooming flowers, so there'll still be some, but it's often quieter because it's harder to book hotels in Italy, for example, like on the Ferragosto holiday. So if you can manage to get a place in Courmayeur, then you're going to have it a bit quieter on the rest of the trail. So end of August, you're going to coincide with the UTMB, the race. So that's going to be a really lively atmosphere, and you get to see some famous runners fly past you. I think that's quite exciting time to do it. Others might think, oh, I'm going to avoid it because it's a pain. It's certainly harder to get accommodation in Chamonix for those nights during that race. September is used to be renowned for being quieter, but I would say that's no longer the case. It is very, very full in early September. I would say if you want peace and quiet, end of September, but be prepared for kind of random weather and be prepared for a couple of things in the infrastructure to have closed, like a couple of mountain huts. You can't always get lunches because a few of the places might be closed, but it'll be very quiet. But I do think there's a reason why July is busiest, and I do think it's because it has statistically the best weather and most of the flowers. So that's for the TMB. And then for the Haute Route, I actually would say, because it's such a short season, just my feeling on that would be where you can get the best accommodation, just, choose your dates and just go for it because, it's such a short season. I wouldn't want to go too early in July though, because there are some bits where the snow on the residual snow will be complicated.
Okay, nice. And this is just a question that I'm looking at the chat. So for late August and early September, what's kind of the worst weather a hiker should be prepared for? And then I have a follow-up on that.
Probably hail and wind at the same time. And then also thunder and lightning. That's quite common, unfortunately, in that, when the heat's built up in the daytime, it is quite common to have afternoon and evening storms. So I think that's my biggest thing that I don't like having. You can cope with a bit of snow, you can put waterproofs on to avoid the rain and the hail, and it can be quite exciting. And, I've never once had a day in the bad weather where I've gone, oh, I wish I didn't go out. It's always, you always have an adventure. But I think the one thing I just don't like, personally, I just don't like being out in the mountains with the lightning storm, because you just can't predict where it's going to be, and you've got to go up high and then over. So you just want to be avoiding that if you can.
Yeah. Okay. And would you ever need crampons or ice axes or things like that in the summer?
You shouldn't. If you do an early season TMB, so like a first couple of weeks of June, you could well need them. And if you do an early season Haute Route, then yeah, you could well need them. But normally you shouldn't. And I would even say from the TMB, from the first week of July onwards, you probably don't even need micro spikes. And for the Haute Route, micro spikes can be quite useful because they're so light. And there's a couple of places where you're fine most of the time. You just want to put them on for a really short section, so that's probably easier than carrying crampons. And I think we advise people to take micro spikes if they're doing it in the mid-July, and then anyone doing it early July, quite possibly full crampons. But we don't do those trips for that reason, because I don't feel as a hiking guide I need to be taking people mountaineering. I am a hiking guide, not a mountaineering guide.
And then what happens if the weather is really, really bad on one of the days? What's kind of the game plan when that happens?
If it's so bad that it's dangerous, then we do a workaround. So I have once in the history of guiding Tour du Mont Blanc taken transport to miss Les Contamines to Les Chapières Day. And that was just due to high winds, lots of snow. I just didn't feel like my clients were going to be equipped fully to cope with and I've done it on my own or with a friend going fast, but I just felt like going at a plod, we were not going to keep warm enough, and we were not going to be, it goes quite high, and there's quite a long period of time where you don't have shelter. So I've only done that once. I just organised taxis to get round. Other times I think I'm wary when there's a heat wave, because the biggest danger is going to be being dehydrated and getting heat stroke and sunstroke. So I do worry about those, and then maybe I really might be shortening the days if we have things like that, and trying to use a cable car where the itinerary might have said to climb up. I might just say, well, we'll just get the cable car, and then you can still enjoy the views. But being up high, it's going to be slightly cooler. Maybe a couple of times I've also bailed when it's been thunder and lightning all day long. I've certainly bailed a few times. Anyone who's hiked with me who's never seen me move faster than when there's lightning around. I would say I always try to hike when it's safe, when it's going to be safe. And it's very, very rare that you have to take transport round, but we organise it where it's required.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to shift to gear a little bit just so I can keep us moving. What is a piece of gear or clothing that TMB hikers typically wish they had brought with them?
So I take on every trip these little boot dryers. They're tiny, lightweight little things, and they plug in. And so if it's been pouring with rain all day and I get soaking wet feet, these will dry my shoes completely overnight. I take these if I've got luggage delivery. This is too much of a luxury item if I haven't got luggage delivery. But if I've got luggage delivery, those going in my kit bag, and I love them. They're my luxury item. For clothing wise, actually, I genuinely, if you read my whole kit list, like some people do just go, oh my God, I won't need that. And so I have had a couple of people who present themselves without waterproof trousers, for example, and because they don't think they need them, and then they've got torrential rain for an entire day. And there's been a couple of occasions, like I can remember fashioning a skirt out of bin bags for someone who didn't have waterproof trousers, and then the higher up we got, it started snowing. She was pretty cold. Yeah, I think, it sounds ridiculous. It's much better to bring all the kit and not need it than to not have it when you do need it.
That kind of answers that. I'm going to keep moving to, this is quite an interesting question. What usually surprises Tour du Mont Blanc hikers about the experience that maybe they weren't expecting?
How much up and down there is surprises people who haven't prepared, who aren't quite fit enough. Maybe that definitely takes people by surprise, quite literally takes their breath away. I also think people are pleasantly surprised by how beautiful it is, because every single day you just go, oh my gosh, how can it be any more beautiful? And then it is. If you haven't seen glaciers before, and if you haven't seen snow-covered mountains in the summer, that is just, I think even people who know what to expect are blown away.
Okay, nice, perfect. Can you tell us the difference between guided and self-guided hikes? And who would you recommend one over the other?
I've stuck to my routes, and that is I have one guide and I have maximum 10 clients. You'll get some companies who will want to just keep the costs down and they'll have one guide and maybe 14 or 16 clients. I like having 10 max. I would say I've tried to describe our trips, like we try and take the variant. So we aren't expecting to get people who are quite fit on our guided trips. It's not for everybody. Like, I love it. I love the camaraderie. I love meeting new people. I love my group trips. They are brilliant, but they're not necessarily for everybody. If people are going to be slightly impatient, then they should definitely do self-guided, because then you can do it at your own pace. You can do what you want. There's any number of ways you can do it. You can either book everything yourself and just do whatever you want, whenever you want, or you can book an itinerary with a company and then they'll book all the accommodation for you. They'll give you trip notes, like route notes. I give people GPS tracks, but not everybody does. I sometimes include like my little secret routes on my GPS tracks. I've got a little app. So particularly in the snowy times in June, I'm updating my app every day. So all my self-guided people get to update their app. And then I'll say, or like the Fenêtre d'Arpet is now doable, or, don't do this route here because it's still snowy and someone fell down it. I just continually updating the app. So that's quite handy, but I don't think that many companies do that. So the people who should do self-guided are, if you're independent and you like doing your own thing, if you want to do your own pace. Also, if you're going to do self-guided, don't take it too lightly. You've got to be able to read a map. You've got to be able to look after yourself in the mountains. You've got to be able to read a weather forecast, work out, is it sensible? You've got to bear in mind, especially for the self-guided Haute Route, for example, that it is higher. You can be without phone signal for a little while. Like, you can't always get help. And so I think if you've never trekked before, ever, I'd be considering a self-guided TMB, but I'd probably be doing like a shorter version just to make sure you're comfortable.
Okay, perfect. What are the main differences between the Tour du Mont Blanc and the Haute Route?
The Tour du Mont Blanc is slightly easier. The Haute Route is wilder. The Haute Route is quieter. Fewer people do it. The Tour du Mont Blanc goes through 3 countries, and the Haute Route goes through 2 countries. The mountains that you see on each trip are all iconic. So I think the views that you see from everywhere are spectacular. You see more 4,000 meter peaks on the Haute Route. Maybe you could say the Haute Route is more overall spectacular scenery because you do see more of these 4,000-meter peaks. But having said that, there's more variety overall of the TMB because you know 3 different countries, different types of hotels, different types of food. So they're both good for variety. The TMBs may be incredibly more popular.
Yeah. Okay. And to go back to the Tour du Mont Blanc, I want to talk a little bit about training for the hike. I know that that varies a lot from person to person. So we mentioned a few kind of one-day hikes that are better for families or easier around the Chamonix area. Can you give me maybe some hikes? It doesn't have to be in France and Switzerland, could be in the world, that you would maybe recommend as either training for the Haute Route or the Tour du Mont Blanc, or just, yeah.
The absolute best training for hiking is more hiking. So do as much hiking as you can anywhere. And even if it's flat, that's still better than no hiking. But the one thing I think is really good to recreate is just going uphill with a pack on and just getting used to doing a plod, because that's the thing that's hard to recreate for most people who don't live in the mountains, because there's these great big long climbs. You could be walking uphill for 3 hours, maybe even 4 hours, just slow plod, but you can't, it's hard to recreate that. So I think it depends where people live, but certainly people who live in the UK are never going to be that far away from one of the UK's hiking areas, you know, the Lake District and Yorkshire Dales and Snowdonia. You know, there's so many places that you can get to within a couple of hours of most places in the UK. It should be quite easy for Brits to get a couple of hiking weekends in before their trip. And I would thoroughly recommend doing that and getting used to doing as much up and down as possible. I think for people who are coming maybe further afield, it's hard for me to say because I don't know a huge amount about hiking in the States. Like, I know we've got loads of people who are in the States, and I don't maybe know enough to recommend those hikes.
Getting used to your boots, to your pack, and just getting elevation in.
It's so important. I think that's a really good point, actually, getting used to your pack as well. A lot of people, because obviously, you know, you're going on this amazing trip, so people are buying stuff in preparation for their holiday. And I think it's really important to pack your rucksack and practice carrying it, even if you're just walking around the town or in a park or something. Just get used to how it fits, get used to which straps you need to do to adjust it. And same with the boots. I think people nowadays, it's more common to do the trail wearing hiking, like trail running trainers. I think there's a lot more people in that wearing those than hiking boots, and the advantage of those is they don't need quite as much breaking in. You know, you can often put them on and then set off. But I do also think, you know, my recommendation would be get used to your footwear, get used to your socks. You know, you don't want to suddenly start introducing brand new stuff for everything for your trip, because, you know, you might suddenly find a pair of socks doesn't fit so well with your boots. So yeah, you want to be as used to your kit as you can be.
And on that topic, how much are you carrying every day if you have daily luggage delivery?
So if you have daily luggage, you can get away with carrying not that much. Like if you're getting daily luggage, you're going to have to carry some waterproof, you know, your waterproof jacket, waterproof trousers, some warmer layers, and your picnic lunch. I've always got a hat and gloves in my rucksack. I might probably take them out for heat waves and things. And personally, I've got a quite large first aid kit, but I'd say my own pack, even with my guiding kit, you know, like I carry an emergency shelter and first aid kit and probably a little bit of extra clothing. My own pack is probably 7 kilos. So yours can be lighter. And the big thing that weighs a lot is water. In cooler temperatures, you don't need to carry quite as much water. I think that one of the good things on the TMB in particular is you can fill up your water quite often. So you don't have to carry like 4 litres all in one go. But that can obviously 4 litres, if you are carrying, can add on 4 kilos. So yeah, you want to do your research about where you're going to be filling up.
And then for footwear, would trail running shoes be okay? Or would you recommend like actual hiking boots with ankle support?
Yeah, this is a question we get asked all the time. And I think from a liability point of view, I have written in my own trip notes that people should bring hiking boots with ankle support, but that's more, I'm actually not so concerned about the ankle support. I was actually put that in there because If it's snowy, then it could be quite difficult in trail running shoes. But I'd say for the absolute majority of the time, these trail running trainers, as long as they've got an off-road sole, they are so good. And they're comfortable. You get fewer people with blisters who are wearing those sorts of shoes. I would say the one caveat is you have to be used to them. If you do spend all your life hiking around in shoes like that, you are going to have strong ankles. If you don't spend your time doing that, then maybe your ankles do need the support from the boots. But I do find, if I'm wearing hiking boots, I can't move as fast. I feel like a bit clumpy. They're so useful when it's snowed and I need to kick steps and be really secure on my feet. Also, they're quite useful, like if it's totally pouring with rain and you don't want to get wet feet. So I'd say early season trips, categorically you want to bring some hiking boots if you're going to be walking in the snow. And if you're only going to be doing small patches of snow later on, then I think trail running trainers are great. I think it's got to be a personal choice.
And then any comments on the Alpine pass route? Is it?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that this person asked this question because I forgot to really mention it. I glossed over it, and it is really a beautiful, beautiful trek. And I actually think now that the TMB is becoming quite busy, it's got several names. Some people call it the Alpine Pass Route, which is what the Cicerone guidebook used to call it. Which is a bit confusing because there's also a different trek in Switzerland called the Alpine Pass Route, which I don't think they mean. So I think this is what we call the Swiss Via Alpina. And it goes, if you do the whole thing, it starts in Liechtenstein, Vaduz, and it finishes in the shore of Lake Geneva, sort of near Montreux area. I think if you do the whole thing, it can take between 17 and 20 days. The first week is kind of easier. The middle and end week are a bit harder. It does go up some quite high passes. It is quite rugged. I think it's comparable. So some of the days are comparable to the Haute Route and other of the days can be much easier. But I tend to do a 10-day section or a 1-week section in around the Kandersteg, or I do Engelberg towards Lake Geneva maybe in 10 days, or a 1-week section. Yeah, spectacular. I love it. And especially the bit through the Bernese Oberland, going through and go past the Jungfrau and the Eiger. Yeah, it's really stunning. Definitely a fantastic route. So yeah, I'd say harder than the TMB and similar to the Haute Route in terms of difficulty.
And then trip insurance, what do you recommend that people get?
Basically, I couldn't imagine going on a multi-day trekking holiday and not having travel insurance because it covers you for everything. If you get travel insurance, it covers you from the moment you buy it. So, for example, if you break your leg now and you're supposed to be doing the TMB this summer, that should cover you for any kind of accident you might have or illness or any reason that you can't come. So it's not just while you're on your trip, it's before. Then if you're during your trip, I think the biggest things you need to look out for, you want your insurance to cover helicopter rescue because that's going to be really, really expensive if you need a rescue in Switzerland, for example. You need to look at the medical cover. You want it to have repatriation, like if you had an accident and you needed to lie flat, for example, and have to get flown back. If you're going to have to pay for that yourself and not insurance, it's going to cost a huge amount of money. But the insurance covers their chosen activity. So you might find, if you get a travel insurance with your credit card, for example, it might have a lot more small print that you really need to look at, and you need to make sure that trekking is covered. You need to make sure what altitude it will cover you to, because, for example, some travel insurance policies will only cover you up to 2,500 meters, and there's quite a few places on the TMB where you go over that, only by a little bit, but they're not going to pay out if you've gone past their stipulations. So we always say make sure that the minimum altitude is 3,000. You're also going to think, this sounds ridiculous, but if you're thinking about going up the Aiguille du Midi and your insurance only covers you to 3,000, okay, you're probably going to be fine. But you just got to have a think about the things you're doing, and are you doing any add-on activity like in your rest days? A lot of people have a rest day in Courmayeur and might go rafting. A lot of people, in Chamonix might do a day's mountaineering or parapente. You just want to make sure the activity you're doing is covered and check the altitude. I've actually made it a part of our terms and conditions. I won't send guides out with clients who aren't insured because I don't think it's fair on the guide. You shouldn't have to be dealing with someone who turns around and says, oh, I don't want a helicopter rescue actually because I'm not insured. Like, the guide needs to be able to say, well, this person needs a helicopter. And so I think you need to check the small print also of your insurance. Like, I've had countless people write to me and say that their insurance company have stipulated they are covered for helicopter rescue, but only if accompanied by a doctor. And you think, well, when an emergency helicopter does come, it probably is going to have a doctor, but not necessarily. Like, they might just have the rescue staff. And so once you start getting into that sort of nitty gritty, I probably wouldn't be touching those insurance companies with a barge pole. So I would just say you get what you pay for. And if it's ridiculously cheap, they're probably not covering you for all the things that you want. And so I also get asked quite a lot for recommendations. And I find it really hard to do it because policies change so frequently. So what I say now might not be relevant because they change their policy next week. I should also say what insurance you get also depends where you're based, because a lot of British companies won't insure you if you're American, and vice versa. So I think you've just got to make sure that it covers you for your nationality, for where you're resident, and also for the country that you start in. So, for example, a lot of British insurance will make you have to start your journey in the UK. And a lot of people don't know that bit of small print, but that's quite a common one. I think people should look at Ripcord because they cover so much and it's no nonsense. And then another company called Global Rescue, those are quite useful for American. I have had people with Travelex, had good service from Travelex in the past. This is also American. And I've had, not 100% sure if that's up to date, but it's worth looking at. For British ones, the BMC, which is the British Mountaineering Council, I mean, that's designed for mountaineers, so that's usually quite comprehensive. One actually really good one, which is the Austrian Alpine Club. Again, they've got a Britannia section, and that's definitely worth looking at. And then there's two others that were particularly good during COVID. One called Battleface, and they will cover you when the Foreign Office is advising against travel. They will still cover you. So that's, again, you get what you pay for. It's not cheap, but it is quite comprehensive compared to a lot of companies. And then another one that was quite good during COVID was Stay Shore, which was a British one. So yeah, do be careful. It is worth spending time choosing a reputable travel insurance and making sure with those, caveats. I think my last piece of advice would be, this part of the world is so spectacular that I think everyone should try and come and see it just the once. Even if you maybe a bit daunted by doing the whole thing, just come and do a week-long hiking trip, just centre-based in Chamonix, and then take a day off as and when you feel like it. And I think, do it at your own pace and enjoy it. And it really is a spectacular place to visit. So go for it.